lot of you guys in the comments tell me that I need to learn a little bit more about Polish history, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. So I was originally gonna watch this video that had the most views, but after watching it for a minute, there was no text or context about anything. All these people were watching these videos and I'm like, there's nothing to comment because I have no idea what's going on the screen. So I watched this video instead, which was way more comprehensive because it actually detailed everything that was going on.
If you live in Central or Eastern Europe, you probably grew up hearing the folktale of the three brothers, Lech, Czech and Rus, the three legendary patriarchs of the Slavic peoples. While out on a hunting trip, the brothers had a disagreement, as brothers do, on which prey to follow, leading them to split up. Czech, the eldest of the brothers, followed his prey to the Czech lands. Rus, the youngest, went east and became the founder of Russia, and Lech, in the middle, founded Poland. Because who cares about consistency? The tale differs slightly from place to place, but many include that Lech travelled north as he followed a beautiful white eagle. The eagle landed in its nest at sunset and looked very breathtaking against the red sky. Lech took this for an omen and decided that the land would be his new home. The white eagle is still a symbol of Poland, blazoned against the red sky of their flag.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I was just gonna say that, is that why you see the eagle on all the flags? I also want to say I like the music. It reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Indeed, Poland did begin with Slavic settlements. The Slavs are likely a civilization that emerged as remnants of the early Indo-European peoples who had migrated out of the Caucasus. From their homeland in Central Europe, they began to expand and migrate in response to the weakening of the Roman Empire. You'll remember this from previous episodes as the Great Migration period. The Poles loved their new home, which they shared with Germanic tribes from Scandinavia and the occasional Asian nomadic raiders. The Slavs of Poland were organized into smaller tribes living in and around the Baltic Sea and the Vistula River Delta. They united under Poland's first official leader, Mieszko. Mieszko was a Duke of the Polands. This was a good gig to have since the tribe eventually became the name of the whole country, Poland. Mieszko was a member of the noble house of Piast, whose dynasty would rule Poland for centuries. With his baptism in 966, the country slowly abandoned traditional Slavic paganism and adopted Western Christianity. Mieszko's son Bolesław the Brave expanded the territory south into what he hoped would be a strong regional power, but alas, it was a bit too early for that still. He established the metropolitan see at Gniezno, forming the headquarters of what would become the Catholic Church in Poland. His consolidation of power led him to be crowned Poland's first official king, and then he died, all in the same year. Which is great, and internal conflicts often plagued the royal court. Until this guy, Casimir the Restorer, restored the monarchy's control, which come to think of it is probably why they called him the Restorer. He modernized Poland into a feudalist society, which came with all those cool things like knights and lords and castles. This helped secure the borders, who up until now had changed depending on who was king. The early kingdom, somewhat weaker than its neighbors, and strapped for cash, did however hold the Mongol invasion into Europe, having been sacked twice before. Notable of this time.
Something that I think about a lot is how violent human history was. Compared to many of the past eras, we live in a time of relative peace. That's something that we heavily take for granted because our ancestors, like our grandparents and many of the generations before, went through war. Growing up in the modern era, I feel like I never had to experience what it was like going through war or having people constantly invade your country, especially growing up in America. The peace that we have in society is held by a very fine thread of everybody just agreeing not to fight or go to war. But as soon as one person decides that, nah, F the rules, I'm just gonna decide to attack everybody, what are we gonna do to stop it? You can say all you want, don't go to war or whatever, but it just takes one person with strong will and an army to completely attack and decimate everybody. We're very blessed to be living in a time of relative peace.
Was the Polish relationship with the Germans, whose dukes and lords had come to possess large amounts of the West, and the Teutonic Knights, who had carved out a significant state for themselves in Livonia and Prussia, a land inhabited by pagans, frequently raided by crusaders. By the time Piast rule ended with Casimir the Great, Poland had lost much of its territory to its neighbors, but with a period of peace, the state soon began to prosper and attract Jewish settlement. The counties in this area became a source of contention between the kings of Poland and the Holy Roman Empire, who fought over the local lords for fealty and allegiance. This resulted in these counties being very mixed, with populations of people from both kingdoms. The whole thing was very un-Bohemian, really. The Jews first settled Poland as merchants on popular trade routes. By this century, the Jewish people had settled in great numbers over many kingdoms in Europe and began their long and very sad history. They were expelled by the masses in all the countries they settled and were often victims of massacres and worse, Crusades. Successive expulsions led the population in Poland to swell, which was a comparatively more tolerant society, which became a center of Judaic learning and culture as the centuries continued. However, things weren't always super peachy, and anti-Jewish riots often erupted in Polish towns, and synagogues were frequently burned. King Casimir
Man, Jewish people just throughout history cannot catch a break.
the Great, dying without an heir, left his kingdom to his nephew Louis, the King of Hungary. Louis left his now 3 kingdoms to his daughters, one of whom died unexpectedly, the other, who was supposed to inherit Poland but inherited Hungary instead, and the last one, Jadwiga, who got Poland. The nobles of Poland welcomed Louis's daughter and crowned her king. Yes, king, not queen. Don't ask. Jadwiga's life would not be unlike a medieval television drama, as she was simultaneously engaged to both the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jogaila, whose kingdom was huge and powerful, and the Habsburg Duke of Austria, who was inbred and fat. I think she made the right choice. The union of Jadwiga and Vladislav formed the Polish-Lithuanian Union, which was now the largest country in Europe under a single monarchy. The Lithuanians had become a strong military power in the previous century, capturing large amounts of...
Something else that I think about, marriage nowadays, we talk a lot about falling in love and loving somebody, but marriage for a vast period of human history was all about essentially business deals, bringing kingdoms together, all that stuff. Love had nothing to do with it. The older that I get, the more arranged marriages make a lot of sense. I'm not saying that it's better or worse. That makes a lot more sense to me. Honestly, this whole entire falling in love with somebody and marrying somebody for love. Love is fleeting. It can only last a moment. The idea behind arranged marriages is that you learn to love that other person. It's just very interesting to me how like that's evolved over the last maybe like 100 years. I just wonder what life would be like now if people didn't marry for love, but married for other reasons.
Of Russian and Mongol land. The now combined countries spread from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The Lithuanians, with their far smaller population, never ventured too far from their castles. Why would you? And preferred to rule Ruthenia from Livonia instead. So by the time of the Union, the much larger Polish population came to dominate the Ruthenia lands, spreading the language and the culture, eventually dwarfing their Livonian allies. The Teutonic Order, that German state on the Baltic, had become somewhat of a bad neighbor, leading raids, crusades, and plundering castles or otherwise stumbling drunk into Polish-Lithuanian territory, starting fires and whatnot. The union of the two states proved beneficial, handing the Knights a crushing defeat at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. They also fought numerous wars with the Muscovites, Tatars, and Ottomans. Noteworthy of the Hegelian period was the efficiency of the feudal system and the pseudo-democratic nature of the parliament, who set up sophisticated bureaucracy for king approval, or disapproval if you are unlucky. Within just a few decades, the Teutonic Order had completely lost their state, with the western half being annexed directly into Poland and the rest becoming a fief of the Polish crown. This gave access of Poland to the prosperous Baltic seaports and an explosion in trade. Keep your eye on this, it becomes important later. The Prussian fief would later be inherited by a duke from Brandenburg, a state within the Holy Roman Empire, a trend which would become ever more troublesome as lords within the HRE would increasingly inherit lands outside the imperial borders. The HRE was weird, don't worry about it. Acquiring Danzig or Gdańsk had huge economic benefits, and cities swelled in size in response to the trade boom, like Poznan, Lwów, and the capital Kraków, and most notably Warsaw. Warsaw, or Warszawa in Polish, was up to this point just a small fishing village. Legend has it that a fisherman named Warsz happened upon a mermaid in the Vistula River named Shawa. The two married and found the town of Warszawa. The Poles, like most Europeans, were often embroiled in wars, and this made famous their heavy cavalry, the winged hussars, which I'm sure I'll be mobbed and lynched if I don't talk about.
Something I think about a lot is history in many parts of the world is so vast. Being raised in America, most of our history books start around like the 1500s, 1600s. History in other parts of the world, in Asia and in Europe, start from thousands of years BC.
Initially a contingent of Hungarian mercenaries, the Hussars soon became an elite shock cavalry so powerful they allowed the Poles to win many otherwise hopeless battles. The Hussars became the envy of Europe, the most powerful and disciplined heavy cavalry the Middle Ages had ever known, and are still a matter of intense national symbolism of Poland.
Nice,
The 16th century was a really big one. It included the Protestant Reformation, affecting mostly German parts of the kingdom, wars against the encroaching Ottomans invading Europe, advancing in science and literature with Copernicus, devising the heliocentric model of the solar system, the nationwide codification of the Polish language, and the biggest one, the changing of the Polish-Lithuanian Union into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a single political entity ratified by the Polish Parliament, or Sejm, with elected rather than hereditary kings. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, or just Poland for short, became a center of power and commerce, and a bulwark against invading Turks would become a larger and larger problem for the European powers since their humble beginnings in Central Asia. During the Polish-Muscovite War, the Poles became involved in the Russian succession crisis, or the Time of Troubles, and began flexing their muscles with their famous hussars. They even occupied Moscow for a short period, but were soon driven out because invading Russia is simply impossible unless you are the Mongols. The series of northern wars and the Russo-Polish War left the Commonwealth in a very precarious and weakened state. This was aggravated by the election of Polish kings, which opened the door for other nations to meddle in Polish affairs, which they did. A lot. During the wars, the Commonwealth lost the territory of Livonia and was devastated by the so-called Swedish deluge, leaving much of the nation in ruins. Poland became weakened during the Great Northern War against Sweden, and during the War of the Polish Succession, it became increasingly clear that Poland's fate was going to be decided by its neighbors.
This is something that I have learned to understand about Polish people and Polish history. Poland is like right in the middle of a bunch of different empires, and that's why they're always stuck in all of this conflict. The Russians or the Austrians or the Ottomans or the Romans, right? Poland is just always caught in the middle of everything. I've said in my videos before, I think that mindset has carried on through many generations. Polish people don't really see people on a basis of race. They identify people on a basis of invader or ally. Me as an Asian person, thankfully, we're considered allies. It makes sense because of the history of Poland and how many times they've been invaded by people from all sides. That's why they're so protective of their culture and their country.
The Polish parliament became ineffective due to complicated veto laws, which made passing reforms or mounting resistance to invasion nothing if not impossible. The political limbo and the sheer size of the Commonwealth started to make cutting pieces out of it look pretty attractive. The last king of Poland, Stanislav II, was elected in 1764 as a puppet of the Russian Empire, aided greatly by the fact that he was in bed with Catherine the Great. Stanislav did attempt reform to try and save face, but was aware the kingdom was on its last breath. Before long, the first partition of Poland was enacted, dividing the outlying provinces between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. In dire straits, the parliament was powerless to stop the invading troops, and forced to ratify the new borders. The Great Sejm tried once more to reform by drafting a formal constitution inspired by the liberties of the French Revolution, but it was enough to provoke Russia again, who saw France as an enemy and Poland as a sympathizer to anti-monarchical sentiments.
Everything that happened in history, I think, influences the behavior of people from a specific country even now through a lot of like generational trauma. I know a lot of that sounds like super woo-woo. I think we can all agree that there's certain behaviors that we have that maybe we don't know where they came from and our families can't really explain it. But if you take a look at everything that happened in our history, for example, I'm Chinese. Chinese people historically haven't been super offensive. They've closed their doors to other nations, but they haven't really attacked other people because we're a lot more adverse to violence. And we try to solve things. If you look at Sun Tzu's The Art of War, the whole entire concept tried to win a battle without having to fight. So I think because of that, that's why Asian people and Chinese people don't really fight. We're not really violent. And even now, I try to avoid conflict, and Asians just normally we try to avoid physical conflict. And I can't really explain why, but I think if you take a look of our ancestral roots in our history, it explains a lot of modern behavior.
Pro- and anti-constitutional forces became embroiled in a war, and Russian forces invaded to broker a defeat to the Republican movement. With an agreement signed with Prussia, the two nations annexed more territory in the Second Partition, reducing Poland to one-third its size and population. The king was horrifically unpopular. The army was in shambles. The parliament was divided and powerless. The common people were furious, and insurrections led to the National Rebellion, led by the military veteran Tadeusz Kościuszko. After an initial success, the rebels failed to garner support from many other nations and were defeated by the surrounding powers. In 1795, the Austrians, Prussians, and Russians decided to put an end to the rebellious Poles and invaded them from three sides.
Dang.
The third partition of Poland, as it became known,
Fortunate.
wiped Poland off the face of the map for the next century. Millions of Poles now found themselves subject to whichever nation they were divided into.
Okay, so this makes a lot of sense. I was talking to one of my friends who's Polish American. She was saying that Poland was wiped off the map for like 100 years, and I never really understood why, but now this makes a lot of sense.
Isolated from one another, and Poland ceased to exist.
He covered a lot of ground very quickly. It's very interesting learning a lot more about Polish history. I highly recommend you guys watch this video next. If there's other videos or other topics you guys want me to react to, leave a comment down below, and the ones with the most likes are the ones that I'll get to.